Shalom, shalom, family. Peace, 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 peace. I speak peace. I speak peace to your families. I speak peace to every troubling situation in your life. May the Most High God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, give you peace in your minds, in your hearts, in your souls. I know this is a time of family gathering. Whether you celebrate the holiday or not, usually this is a time of family gathering, and for some, a time of reflection. And sometimes reflecting on things of the past during this times, maybe a loved one has passed on that you didn't get to resolve an issue with, or it may be something within yourself. People usually tend to do a lot of reflecting on their lives and things, especially going into a new year, the ending of a new year. Um, there are a lot of things that people have regrets about. And so oftentimes what tends to happen is that we do um, what we've been told to do and taught to do, and that sort of repress feelings, repress memories, things that have not uh, been productive in our lives, things that have not been our fault, uh, especially since when we were children. There are a lot of things that have been falling us as children, and not just in the Black community, but people as a whole, that oftentimes we rarely get resolution. We rarely get answers. And those things often go into our adulthood. Eric Badu years ago talked about the bag lady, right? And she says, you're going to hurt yourself dragging all those bags like that, right? And oftentimes, this is what we do year to year, every cycle around the sun. That's a shot to you flat earthers. Every shot around the sun, there's we drag baggage year after year after year after year. Relationships that didn't go well, whether they're with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife, mother or father, sister, brother, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, relationships that we find ourselves involved in. We carry this baggage, these unresolved issues, things that we need answers to, things we've never gotten answers to before. And oftentimes we fail to realize that it's because of these things that we have difficulties even having conversations with other people about them. We can't share them. And I'm a firm believer that when you have things like that befall you in your life that are hurtful and that are painful, unresolved issues that you carry, maybe your father wasn't around, maybe your mother didn't treat you so well, or vice versa. People are abandoned, orphaned, left with family members. People with feelings are unprotected. People who feel unprotected in life, they go through these various things and they hold them in. And as you grow into adulthood, we rarely find any resolution with these things. And I'm a firm believer that people that hold these things in, these are people that usually later on in years, they have issues with cancer. They have a lot of internal issues and sickness and health sickness. Mental health is something that's rampant in our communities. We don't seek help when we need it. There's nothing wrong, Black people and Black men, especially Black men. But Black men and Black women, listen, there's nothing wrong with therapy. And here's the thing, your homie and your girl that you hang out with, both men and women, although their intentions may be well, you have to realize they're not professionally equipped to deal with some of the things that you have. Even your spouse or that person that's laying next to you on the pillow, you may share with them and they be able to listen to you and they may sympathize with you. They may even be able to help you through a situation by being there and being comforting. But sometimes you got to realize that they're not professionally equipped to deal with the mental anguish and the things that a lot of us have gone through in life. And it's okay. And we need to say this. It's okay in the Black community, especially among our Black men. It's okay to seek help. Go talk to somebody professionally. Professionally. A lot of these services are free. They're free. But there's a stigma in the Black community, especially among Black men, that somehow that shows a weakness. And see, when people talk about toxic masculinity, which is really only an ideology, there's nothing, there's no gene, or there's no chemical in the body that produces toxic masculinity. It's only an ideology or learned behavior. It really doesn't exist. I'm gonna get into that one day. We're gonna talk about masculinity and toxic masculinity and these type of things, and where they came from and where they originated from. Some of you are going to be surprised where these things originated from. But to me, that is what toxic masculinity is, right? Is that men have been taught when you fall and scrape your knee, you get up, you don't cry. We often teach that to our sons. But what that does is, and it has the adverse effect that when you feel pain or you experience something unpleasant in life, you don't express it through emotion, right? You don't express it. You don't seek out nurturing, right? You don't seek out the comfort. You don't seek out the things that you need in order to deal with that pain appropriately. We just teach our young Black boys to suck it up. And it's that seed that begins to produce that toxic behavior. That's what I call toxic masculinity. When we're out of touch with our feelings in the degree that we haven't been taught to express them in a proper way. And those things, as they are internalized, become pressure, right? Physically and mentally, they become pressure. And if you know anything about pressure, if it's contained, that pressure will cause an explosion. And often that's what we see in the behaviors of a lot of our men and women. But especially in our men, we see a lot of these expressions or this acting out of this behavior because of this internalized pressure of not being able to express our feelings in a healthy manner without feeling as if we're less masculine, or even being in fear of reprisal of someone telling us you're soft, or someone telling us you're weak, or someone telling you, little boys, that's not what boys do. Boys don't cry. And so we hear that from people that we trust growing up. And so what do you think we do with that? We internalize that. And then it becomes a conflict. I'm experiencing pain right now, but I've just been told that if I do that, then I'm failing. If I express my anger because I've been wronged, if I express it in a way that I'm seeking out nurturing, that I'm saying that thing hurts me, instead of saying the wrong that has been done to me, I'm hurting and I need nurture. I need someone to guide me to a place where it's okay, where I can feel safe to express myself, to express the hurt and the pain that I have without acting it out violently. That it's okay to say I'm not okay. I was taught this as a young man, and it took me years to understand that you have to be able to say, I'm not okay. You have to be able to say, I'm not doing so well. that because someone wronged me, that I don't just have to suck it up and keep it to myself. And then we wonder why we act out things with our loved ones. And it's usually the people that are closest to us that we hurt the most, because that pressure of not being able to release those feelings that have built up since we were children and up until adulthood, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of pressure of simply not being able to say, I'm hurting, because I don't want to be looked at as less of a man. I don't want to be looked at as weak. I don't want to be looked at as a failure of a man. I don't want to be looked at as effeminate. I don't want to be looked at as girly. That's the toxic masculinity that we develop. But those things are taught in learned behaviors. You're not born that way. We're not born that way. Those things are taught. And as men, we fight this daily. We fight this daily. How and when is appropriate to express my anger? Am I moving in the right direction? How do I respond to this without losing my identity in society? How do I express myself, and how do I get help without being or seemingly as though as I'm weak? This is the only way that I know to protect my feelings, right? Is to act out in a violent manner. Because we haven't been exposed to the vehicles and the outlets that allow us to appropriately address our feelings. And so oftentimes, what happens is that as young boys and young women too, but as young men, we're taught not to express our feelings and not to show emotion and to suck up the pain, to neglect the healing power of nurturing, right? There's a healing power in nurturing. That's one of the things that makes women powerful. But we fail to realize that men also have the power to nurture. But society has made us callous to that, has told us that that's not manhood, that that's weakness, that that's an issue for you as a man. And then it tells our young women that that's not a man. He shouldn't be nurturing. He shouldn't be crying. He shouldn't be expressing his feelings in an appropriate manner. Why? Because now he sounds like a little girl, or now he sounds like a bitch. He's bitching. You sound like a little girl if you're expressing yourself. These are the things that aid toxic masculinity. And so what we need to do as adults, if you find yourself in these situations, talk to someone. And when I say talk to someone, I'm talking about talk to someone professionally. Because a lot of us feel like we're talking with, if I just can talk to my girlfriend, if I could just talk to my homie, I'll get. But here's the thing, and I will say this. My father used to teach me, and he still teaches this, right? And my father used to teach me that you'd be lucky in life to have one person that you can really and truly call your friend. If you have two people like that in your life, consider yourself an anomaly. Consider yourself, consider it a phenomenon in your life that has occurred. If you can find two people that you can truly call your friends. And here's another thing that we have to understand when we're talking about friendship, right? If you have someone in your life that you call a friend and they can't correct you when you're wrong and tell you, say, hey, you fucking up right now, excuse my language, and say, hey, listen, you're not doing what you know you should be doing as a husband, as a father, as a brother, as a mother, as a sister, as a wife, or even just as a productive citizen. If they can't tell you that without you becoming angry at them and dismissing everything that they have to say, then that's truly not your friend. In your mind, you really don't value their friendship. You don't value their friendship. And if you can't tell them the same thing, then you're not their friend. You're not their friend. If a person can't come to you who you talk to every day, who hang out with you every day, who you share everything with mostly, if they can't tell you when you're messing up, then stop lying to yourself that you think that you feel like that's your friend, because that's not truly how you feel about them. You're only okay with them because they agree with you. You're only around them all the time because they agree with your pain. They don't challenge you to change. They don't challenge you to grow in a positive manner. And simply, they're not your friend. They're simply your trash receptacle that you dump in constantly. You constantly dump it. You're not imparting anything of wisdom and knowledge and understanding that would allow them to grow, because those things come to challenge your shortcomings, right? And if you have a friend that's around you constantly, or a person that's around you constantly, and they never challenge your shortcomings, that's not a friend. They don't consider your health and your well-being, because that's what friends do. When they see you going astray, they say, hey, look, that's not the way to go. Or if they can't tell when you're killing yourself physically and emotionally, that they don't tell you to seek some help. That's not your friend. If they're not doing that, and if you don't allow them the space to do that, you're not their friend. But a lot of times what we have is we have things that we deal with because we internalize so much pain, we become untrusting. Or we internalize so much pain in our younger years, in our life as children, that what we tend to do is we tend to lash out and act out against people that we come in contact with, because that's the only space that we've learned to operate in, is within that pain. And what happens is that pain becomes therapeutic for you, because you can't identify, you don't know who you are. You're looking at yourself in the mirror, and without the feeling of that pain, you don't know who you are. So you retreat back to that comfort zone of pain. And people don't realize that a lot of times their comfort zone is in pain. So oftentimes we hear people say, look, I'm going through something, I'm dealing with an issue, and the first thing they do is they go to the fridge, get out the biggest pint of ice cream that they can find, the biggest pack of cookies, and they just start eating. And you ain't hungry, but now you have what they call it, what? Comfort food. You just start eating, 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 eating. All the while, you're living within that pain, right? And you're addressing it by overindulging in food and don't realize you're killing yourself because you know it's not healthy. You know it's not healthy for you. But because you don't know any other way to deal with that pain, you only act out the thing that you know is comforting to you, but it's killing you. It's killing you. You got high blood pressure, hypertension, sugar diabetes. But yet you internalize that pain and you go right to the fridge and slowly begin to commit suicide. That's what you do. That's what happens. And what I'm saying is we often act out our pain in ways that we internalize and they begin to kill us from the inside out. And if we don't get the help that we need, even in our younger years up until our adulthood, oftentimes what we do is we start telling other people, well, you know how I deal with it when I have these issues. You start perpetuating that thought and that understanding that, hey, if you're dealing with something internally, do what I do, girl. Hey, man, do what I do. Girl, what do you do? Girl, I just get me a big old tub of ice cream and I get me some cookies and I just sit back and eat to comfort myself, to ease my pain for the moment. And you know what they say? Yeah. Okay. I don't see how that works, but okay. And then as soon as they experience some pain, what comes to them? Well, so-and-so says she goes to the refrigerator and gets some cookies and ice cream. Maybe I'll try it. And then they do the same thing. Now they're killing themselves. Or you have men say, you know what, man? Hey, if I want to release this stress, you know what? I'm just gonna go find me 3, 4, 5, 6 women to sleep with. I'm just gonna sex it away. Solange said that in one of her songs. She thought she was dealing with internal issues and dealing with certain things, and she thought she could sex it away. Not realizing killing your spirit. Men do this often. They feel like they can sex their pain away. And so they have 5 babies over here and 5 babies over there and another 10 babies down the street trying to sex away their pain. No regards to the lives that you're creating and responsible for, because you simply sexing away. I often hear people say it's like when you don't deal with the internal issues that you have and you only deal with the external issues, it's just like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Just saying, yeah, I fixed the problem. I fixed the problem. But no, you didn't. You just did something temporary. But you're still bleeding. You're still losing. You're still failing. And so some of us, we're looking at the title and it says predators, sexual predators are made. They're not born. Right? Sexual predators are made. They're not born. And oftentimes, those of us who hear these situations and certain things, and when people tell us that they've been traumatized in life, no one listens. And this just doesn't happen to men and women. It happens, or women, men or women, but it happens to both. especially in our community, in our Black community, especially when we talk about sexual trauma. Sexual trauma in the Black community, this does not affect Black women, but it also affects Black men, little Black boys and little brown boys. It affects them as well. We can find study after study after study after study, report after report after report after report, how sexual trauma in our communities affects our young daughters, how it affects our sisters, how it affects our mothers, how it affects the women in our lives. But there's very little data on how sexual trauma affects little Black boys and little brown boys in our communities. Oftentimes, when we hear these things, you start to hear and you start to see, or even ask yourself, when it comes to sexual trauma as in regards to little Black boys and little brown boys, does it affect them in the way that it affects little brown girls and little Black girls in our communities? Is there a divide there? How is it addressed? How do we feel about the stories of Black men who talk about sexual abuse that they've experienced and the trauma that they've experienced as children versus when we hear it about women? Oftentimes, I must admit that I have to really think about it when I hear stories or things about men who talk about experiencing sexual trauma as children. I have to really think about it sometimes. And it's just a natural reaction. As opposed to when you hear about it happening to women, we automatically know that that's something that's wrong. But we should know that. And brothers, if you don't know that, then you need to really get some help, right? Does it really affect us differently? And so when I'm talking about sexual predators are made, they're not born. I want to talk a little bit about why it's important that we bring these types of issues, especially dealing with our Black men, to the forefront, especially in regarding sexual trauma. We have to bring these things to the forefront because a lot of us are still asking questions. And this is not the answer to all the reasons why, but this is a major issue that Black men deal with, that they keep to themselves, that is not looked upon seriously as other groups. And it speaks as to why we act the way we act, the violent acts that we have towards women and children, a lot of times that you see Black men acting out. And these things, and let me put a plug in this. These things aren't excuses for anyone's behavior, but we need to highlight things so that we can understand and prevent these things when we see them in young children, in young boys, how to recognize these things, right? In Black men and even men that have grown up who've experienced sexual trauma. If you or a loved one, a sister, a niece, an aunt, you yourself personally, if you're engaging in relationships with these types of men who've experienced sexual trauma and some of them express it to you, you have to take that seriously. You have to take that seriously to the degree where you must understand that they need some help because they have the potential of that pressure that we talked about being built up in them for so many years, at some point being triggered and exploding. And you pray that you're not in the vicinity of that individual, of that man, when that pressure explodes, of dealing with that type of trauma for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in life. So this is important for you to be able to even recognize that and not to take it lightly, like so many in the Black community do when it comes to the sexual abuse of little Black boys and little brown boys. We hear about it and people have talked about it, but it's just not enough. It's not enough. And the reason why I know that it's not enough is because in my research on this topic, there's very little information. And when I say very little information, I'm talking about new, recent studies, many different studies. They're really non-existent. Very few of them. Very few of them. No one's really observing the sexual abuse of Black boys and how they act that out in adulthood. And how these things are affecting their relationships with Black women and how they're affecting their relationships with themselves and with their children. I'm not saying this is the only issue that we have to deal with Black men, but it's there. It's one and it's prominent. And because we deal with so many stereotypes, especially about men in our society, and especially in the Black community, right? That having sex is not about, first, about reproducing, right? That sex is something of a badge and honor to wear, especially for young men at an early age or any age. But when it comes to our young girls, they're talked about as whores or being promiscuous or being loose or fast or jazzy, that type of stuff. But when it comes to our little Black boys at early ages and young ages, that it's heralded as some type of conquering or some type of rites to passage, right? And your homies and everybody around and some fathers, they big up in their sons, when they find out the sons lost their virginity as early as 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. The mothers are horrified, but you got the fathers giving the sons high fives. That's toxic masculinity right there, because you're not understanding that comes with a trauma that is rarely addressed in our communities. That comes with the trauma. Sex comes with a responsibility. Sex comes with consequences. And rarely are those responsibilities and consequences taught to our young boys at an age when sex runs rampant around them. It's in the movies, it's in the TV. You can't even play a video game without the character, the female character, got her breasts out, right? And the blouse is all down to the belt. My son, 8 years old, he'll be 9. And I was watching him play, video game. And I started to look at the characters and how more lifelike they're becoming, how real they're becoming, right? And I'm looking at the age appropriate game, and it says it's like, for ages, like 9 or 10. And then they got for ages like, 17, 12 or 17 or 18 or different things like that. And so I'm looking at it. And what I started to realize was that he likes to play the Arkham, the Batman game, right? And there's the character that they have from the comic books in the movie, Harley Quinn. And I'm looking at the character, right? Now, she's not the main theme of the video, but when you look at how she's depicted as a female. But the over sexualization of the character, as it's being presented to young children in these video games, it's the big breast, the cleavage showing, the buttocks, the short shorts and different things like that. These are things that if young boys and young men are visualizing without any understanding of the consequences and the repercussions of what it means to be involved with someone sexually at a young age, these things can be devastating. And so what happens is young boys starts to internalize these things, right? And so then they're the ones that are now teaching your children about sexuality and what it means to be involved or be in a sexual space. They do it in the video games, they do it in the movies, they're even doing it in the classrooms as young as 2nd and 3rd grade now. They're sending little papers home and little cartoon books home dealing with topics of sexuality, and not in the area of just the responsibilities against sexual diseases and STDs. Because they're telling your kids it's okay. If you didn't really know at these ages now, they're telling your kids it's okay to have oral sex. That's what they teach you. It's okay to have oral sex, right? Instead of preaching or teaching total abstinence till you get to an age where you can really understand what you're being involved in and who you're being involved with. They just say, well, just don't do that because that can get you pregnant. And if that gets you pregnant, then you have to deal with this child, and you have to deal with abortion, and you have to do that. But they're not telling you don't have sex as a kid. They're not telling you that anymore. They're just telling you what type of sex to have that you don't get pregnant. And then how, you can protect yourself from an STD, because we know y'all kids and y'all go do it anyway. That shit is crazy. It's crazy. But I want to get into some interesting things. And some of y'all gonna be mad at me, but y'all know me. I'm Elder Yara. Y'all get it. Y'all get it. I was telling them last night, hey, I'm not, I'm cut from a different type of cloth. I'm cut from that Teflon. You understand what I'm saying? I get it. But we're gonna get into some things, right? And I want to talk about some things, and I'm not really trying to, and I'm going to bring up some familiar people that you guys are familiar with, and we're going to talk about these things, right? And so I'm going to show some things, right? I'm going to show some things. I'm going to share my screen, and I want you guys to see something. Let's talk about it.
Teacher.
Let me go back. There we go.
County teacher arrested, accused of having a sexual relationship with a student. Police arrested 26-year-old Sarah Brooks yesterday, and now she's charged with sexual assault by person of authority. She's accused of being sexually involved with a senior at Archer High School. The school district now telling us Brooks has resigned.
Also new at 5, a Bartow County school system employee faces a list of charges following accusations that she was having inappropriate relationships with students. The Bartow County Sheriff's Office took Heather Kishen into custody this morning. According to the Sheriff's Office, the complaint said that Kishen was involved in a sexual relationship with several students at Appalachia High School. The 35-year-old is charged with child molestation, furnishing alcoholic beverages to persons below the legal age, and sexual assault against a person enrolled in school. Kishen is being held at the Bartow County Detention Center awaiting a first court appearance.
In March 2019, Windham police began investigating Laura Amro, the superintendent of Windham schools, after they were contacted by a concerned parent. There were disturbing allegations that Amro pursued sexual relationships with at least two 16-year-old students while she was principal at Windham High, and that some of the encounters happened in her office. During questioning by police, she denied being the woman in a video being shared around the school by students. But the officer advised her there was evidence of her illegal relationship with one of the boys on Snapchat and in text messages. The 35-year-old must now serve 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to charges involving two of those 16-year-old boys. Natalie, she revealed in court that she is pregnant and is due in March. The court decided that she will begin serving the prison term 2 weeks after the baby is born.
Northwestern middle school teacher Ella Ray Silva is behind bars and accused of having sex with a 15-year-old student. The East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office says Silva and the student were in a relationship over the summer. According to an arrest warrant, Silva sent nude photos and videos to the victim. It also says they had sex several times and that she picked him up from his home without his parents' consent. Reports say Silva also gave him an e-cigarette with THC. That arrest warrant also states that Silva asked the victim not to report their relationship because it would affect her career and family. She was arrested and booked Thursday on several charges, including carnal knowledge of a juvenile, indecent behavior with juveniles, and contributing to the delinquency of a juvenile.
So developing at this hour, a Kellyville high school teacher faces rape charges accused of sleeping with her 18-year-old student.
25-year-old Kaylin Thompson, an English teacher at Kellyville High, resigned mid-April. Detectives say that's the day they started investigating her for allegedly sleeping with her 18-year-old student. Detectives say this happened twice, once at Hebron Lake and once at a Tulsa motel. And they say that they got an arrest warrant for her on Friday, but she turned herself in this morning at 10 a.m. Digging deeper, in Oklahoma, a consensual relationship is 16 years old, but detectives say this isn't consensual because she's his teacher, an authority figure. So the student must be at least 20 years old.
Former Munster teacher arrested last year accused of having sex with a 16-year-old and 18-year-old student has avoided jail time in a plea deal with prosecutors.
Lynn Burge is a former teacher at Munster High School. An arrest warrant states Burge sent nude pictures of herself to a 16-year-old boy through Snapchat in the fall of 2017, then went backroading and drank alcohol with him before taking the student to her home and having sex with him. Then last March, pulled the same routine with an 18-year-old male student. She admitted to having sex with the 18-year-old, which is illegal because she was his teacher at the time. She admitted to almost everything the 16-year-old said happened, but told investigators she couldn't remember if they had sex since she was also intoxicated at the time. An anonymous tip about Burge was sent to the Department of Family and Protective Services, who investigated for a month before informally interviewing Burge. Instead of serving time, the former high school teacher was given 5 years probation. She'll also pay a $2,500 fine for each offense, according to the district attorney.
Well, as part of the deal, Burge is also ordered to surrender her teaching license. The district attorney said in a statement they believe this is a just and appropriate plea after consulting with the families of the victims.
New tonight, investigators say a former teacher was arrested for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. They said they got a tip about a possible inappropriate activity in May, then investigated and arrested Jillian Reynolds today. She is scheduled to appear in court June 27th. Investigators say the case involves a student at Union Pines High.
Police believe this woman, 27-year-old Sarah Fowkes, engaged in sexual contact with a 17-year-old male student. She was arrested today and posted bond just hours later. Fowkes has been with the Lockhart Independent School District since the fall of 2014. She's now been suspended by the district. Lockhart's ISD superintendent says the district does not tolerate any improper communication or contact between a teacher and a child.
Crime Bee now, a substitute teacher is behind bars accused of inappropriate sexual conduct with students. Delhi Charter School administrators contacted Richland Parish sheriffs yesterday about allegations involving 29-year-old Brittany Kirby and two male students. RPSO investigators learned during the investigation Kirby had engaged in inappropriate sexual conduct over the past 3 months with those two students. When questioned by investigators, Kirby admitted to the allegations. She is charged with 2 counts of felony carnal knowledge of a juvenile.
A Madison County teacher is on administrative leave tonight, accused of sexual misconduct with a student. Sheriff's deputies arrested Catherine Coffey today. Investigators looked into allegations made earlier this week. Deputies say there is evidence that Coffey was involved in misconduct between August and December of last year. According to the school district website, Coffey teaches at Madison County Elementary School.
Let me stop that in that video real quick.
Cabernet County teacher arrested accused of having a
Me in
sexual
that video
relationship
real
with a
quick.
student. Police arrested 20.
And come back and stop sharing really quickly. And the reason why I brought that out, and we saw that those predators were Caucasian women, right? Dealing with young students, right? And that's usually what we hear and what's told to us, that that type of behavior is much more rampant again among white women and dealing with white students. But what they don't tell you in these stories is that most of these teachers, they're teaching in rural areas or inner city schools where most of the population are African American children. That's the other part. And so it's easy for us to even digest this. And it's a reason why I showed these women here. That's a lot easier for us to digest and see these women, these white women, as predators, right? Because we believe, again, our stereotypes, that usually that's who are committing these crimes. And that's the story that we take, right? Well, that's mostly white women that do that, right? When it comes to students, right? But who looks into our inner city communities, our inner city schools, and our neighborhoods, where the predators, the sexual predators, are Black women? Who talks about that? Where's the data on that? When we talk about trauma as a whole, right? We have to understand this thing in its totality, right? Sexual predators are made, they're not born. There's no gene, there's no chemical in the body, there's no endorphins that are released at a higher level than others that produces a sexual predator from birth. There's no genetic displacement, right? Or no DNA that's been isolated that shows that this person is a sexual deviant from the womb, right? Now you can make an argument if you talk spiritually, right, in a spiritual sense, right? Are spirits attached to children in the womb? And as they come out, these spirits carry with them and they walk with them, right? Or genetically speaking, and some people will say, well, it's a possibility. But this is what I'm saying. There's no scientific evidence that people are born sexual predators. It doesn't exist. It just does not exist. right? There's no such thing as people, and I'm reading this out the chat, that people are born bad, right? See, that's where the excuses come in at. No, what we have is learned behavior. Learned behavior, right? Or classical conditioning, or Pavlov's law. When children are placed in an environment that are not conducive for them to be healthy or to think in a healthy manner. But no one's born that way, right? But let's get into it, right? And show this white women to show how biased we are, even stereotypically, when it comes to this particular issue about sexual trauma among Black boys in our communities. And I did this to prove something to the people that are listening and some of the people that are in the chat. Because the responses that I saw in the chat, and thank you guys for being a part of my experiment today. The responses that I saw that, yeah, this happens more among white women than Black women. That's a generalized statement that there's no observable data to support that statement, because it's not being looked into with the degree as we see with white female sexual predators. There's nothing to support that. And so we've already taken a biasness. We already have a confirmation biases in regards to sexual trauma and over-sexualization of Black boys in our community. That it can't possibly come from within. It can't possibly come from the Black woman in dealing with young Black boys and sexual trauma. It's impossible. Because that's not what we do. But the white women, yeah. But Black women, no, that's not us. That's impossible. What are we basing that on? What observable data are we basing that on? I'm just asking the question. Well, let's go a little bit further. Let me show you guys something. Let me show you guys something. I'm going to share my screen again. Second part of my experiment.
I loved it. Lil Wayne is a living legend. In fact, I loved it. Lil Wayne is a living legend. In fact, the Carter 3 has always been my favorite CD, but unfortunately, recently I did lose it after leaving it at the bathroom at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Weezy has had a long and fruitful career, dropping 12 albums, winning 5 Grammys, and sleeping with so many women, I can only assume he's caught as many STDs as Ash Ketchum has caught Pokemon. Legend has it Wayne has slept with thousands of women, which is understandable considering the fact that he calls himself the Pussy Monster and released a song saying he wanted to bang every girl in the world. Those lyrics probably should have come with a disclaimer saying every girl in the world over 18.
How old are you, baby? Oh no, put her back. Put her back.
So it's safe to assume that Lil Wayne has one of the highest libidos in hip-hop, despite what his lackluster threesome sex tape video have you believe. But the glamour of Lil Wayne's love life was punctured in 2009 when a clip from his unauthorized Carter documentary released, showing him telling a story recounting his first time having sex at age 11.
I was fucking at 11.
But what's interesting about this clip is the role that Birdman seems to play in instigating a seemingly illegal and abusive sexual encounter for the preteen Wayne.
I'm gonna do you like baby them did me. Yeah. I never forget the word. Suck like Wayne let dick.
I personally found this kind of hard to watch because the whole thing goes from harmless backstage banter to an episode of Surviving R. Kelly real quick. Just for context, this is the moment in the documentary where Lil Wayne starts asking about the sexual activity of his 15-year-old protege, Justin Bieber's designated driver, and the Disney Channel's very own Devo, Lil Twist. Wayne goes on to suggest that he's going to do Lil Twist like Birdman did to him, and he then recounts a story of being 11 years old in a studio surrounded by men, including Birdman, whilst he's pressured along with another underage girl into performing a sex act.
It was about this many niggas and shit too in that bitch. I mean, like, told me, girl with your good dick. Girl, you know you sit with your good dick suck and that boy, that bitch suck all Nick. Yo, Nick, I'm sitting there like, sure, yeah. Suck up.
In 2019, this story comes across a lot less like harmless fun and a lot more like a deeply troubling tale of sexual abuse, especially considering the implication that him and the girl were egged on and maybe pressured by Birdman and his crew. If you don't know Birdman, aka Baby, he is the Cash Money Records honcho who signed Lil Wayne when he was a child.
Lil Wayne is a part of the Hot Boys, which will be doing his solo album.
And refers to himself as the #1 stunner, despite how his face looks. His nickname #1 stunner is supposed to refer to his flashy lifestyle, constantly showing off an amazing selection of cars, incredible selection of watches, and a terrible array of tattoos. This includes a giant star tattooed on the top of his cue ball head, which I don't know whether I need to slap or take back to Gohan so I can become a Super Saiyan. It sounds a lot like Birdman instigated this act, and it's highly possible that by doing this, he may have even committed a crime. But if you're hoping to see Birdman prosecuted for this, you're out of luck, because not a lot of people know this, but he is actually immune from prosecution by having diplomatic immunity.
I'm good anywhere in the motherfucking world here, man. I could do basically. They can't bring me to jail. I could total scrap. I'm good with anything but a murder.
Well, I suppose his diplomatic certificate would be a little bit more impressive had the word diplomat been spelled correctly. I actually did look into this a little bit more, and it turns out it is true. Birdman is immune from prosecution, but only for crimes committed against the electro DJ Diplo. In addition to this story, many people have speculated over the years that something fishy has been.
So here's what I'm saying. So we see at 11 years old, Lil Wayne, one of the biggest hip hop / rock stars in the world in the last decade, at least. And you see the casual exchange of him being surrounded by other black men. He tells the story about how at 11 years old, he's involved or pressured, right, into having this sexual encounter with a young black woman, right? And so what happens is that we see this glorification of it in our communities. We see this glorification of it. And I'm bringing this up because I'm dealing with both sides. It's not just black women and not just talking about black men. I'm talking about the over-sexualization and sexual trauma that young men deal with in life. Like, let's elevate the conversation, right? Because most of you fail to be able to do that because you're still stuck in your traumas. You haven't healed. So the issue is that, as I was saying earlier, it's glorified. It's glorified. And trust me, Lil Wayne's statement here about being pressured to have sex at 11 years old is a story that is widespread among young black men and black men as a whole in our communities. That's something that's talked about often in the barbershops. Yeah, I'm telling you, right? That's something that's talked about often. And often what you see is what you saw in that scene. Him surrounded by young black men who've probably been through the same trauma. And the stigma of that trauma being made to feel like a badge of honor, then understanding that they are victims of sexual abuse at the hands of an adult or facilitated by the hands of an adult. It's more prevalent in our communities today with our young Black boys. So when we're looking for reasons and ways and trying to understand why do they act out in certain ways, why do they seemingly have an aversion towards our women, towards Black women, why do they seem to be less empathetic or not sympathetic to the understanding of Black women and what it means, the sexual trauma and even rape. You have an 11-year-old who's now forcibly put in a situation that he's been sexually abused. Do any of us think that that was his first and last encounter sexually, beginning at 11 years old? No. Now he's perpetuating that over-sexualization and that behavior. And as you've seen in the video, he even has now, he's grooming other young boys, Black boys in the community, taking that trauma and passing it on. Because why? It's been perverted to a degree where now it's being used as a badge of honor, and everyone around him supports that. And we don't and we try to, and it seems as though we can't understand what's wrong with our Black boys and why they act out the way they act out sexually. Why they act out the way they act out towards women. I keep telling you people, when you have men who are serial abusers or men who abuse women, there's not a switch that happens at 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, that they wake up and they flip the switch and now they're an abuser. They're a sexual predator. There's no switch that's flipped on at these ages. These things are seeds that have been planted in them at early ages in their lives. And these seeds are gone unaddressed and they're growing. For Lil Wayne, 11 years old to 15 years old to 20 years old to 25 years old. This seed has grown, and now he's perpetuating this behavior that now he's teaching this trauma to other Black boys and Black boys. And instead of understanding that he's a victim, he doesn't even know he's been victimized. He doesn't even know he's a victim, and that what he's expressing and what he's acting out and what he's teaching others is more victimization. Now he becomes the sexual predator. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? Now he becomes the sexual predator. Why? Because now he's teaching that behavior, that toxic behavior, to another. But we dismiss this. Oh, well, it happens. Yeah, we acknowledge it happens. But to what degree do you acknowledge it? What degree do you understand it? What degree do we understand it? Sexual predators are made. They're not born. They're not born that way. They're made. They're made by men and women in the society that take advantage of children, that are taking advantage of our Black boys. And because no one has presented or focused their spotlight on Black boys as sexual predators, or spotlighted on them as sexual or victims, I should say, of sexual predators. We only see them as sexual predators, as Hillary Clinton termed or said years ago in the Bill Clinton campaign, these super predators, as she was referring to a 14-year-old young Black child. He's a super predator. Not addressing or attempting to understand who created him. He's not born that way. He's not born that way. So these are not excuses. But the problem is that these victims of sexual abuse of our young boys in the Black community, they grow up and they begin to pass this behavior along, or they continue to act it out. And then by the time we see it or we hear it, we hear their predatory actions, or they're monsters. These Black men are nothing but monsters. But if you understand Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which really had to do with Black men, and we'll talk about that, and the sexual inefficiency or inferiority of white men in regards to Black men's size of the penis, and that penis envy, that different types of thing. It dealt with the sexual predatory actions of Black men, right? They wanted us Black men to be viewed as monsters, to stay away, and for white women to stay away from Black men. So they viewed Black men in this light, right, as this monster, right? But everybody knows who Frankenstein is. They know he's pieced together from parts of the dead, and how he was given life, right? And the hideous look and the fear that comes along with dealing with this monster and recognizing this monster. Everybody knows about that, but nobody ever talks about the crime that the creation has committed, and then how it's never talked about the creator, the one responsible for creating this abomination. No one talks about those who are creating these abominations that we see in our communities, because that's what you guys are referring to them as. You're referring to Black men and Black boys as abominations, those that don't deserve to live. #abort. You want us to believe that these monsters in the community are born that way. Sexual predators are made, not born. We have to understand, when we've been spoon-fed these things that are not have not been scientifically studied or observable, that these narratives are simply pushed to demonize and not to rejuvenize, or these things are being reported to demonize and not to build up. And so all we see is predators. That's all you see. That's all you see. And you've taken your hands off what you've been responsible for. You've taken your hands off. You step back from what you created, from what you made, and not at birth. Not at birth. The issue is not you giving birth to Black men. to black boys. That's not the issue. The issue is, what are you doing with them after you've given birth to them? What are you teaching them? What are you not teaching them? So you have to go with the argument that the male seed, the black male seed in of itself intrinsically is evil. Oh, but to the contrary, no data to support that foolishness. You lack understanding. It's simply a lie. No one's born a predator. But what you have is learned behavior. I suggest that some of you actually start doing research, because this is a psychological issue. This is a mental health issue, right? But psychology speaking, study Bonifer's rings. Some of you need to really study that, because you're listening to things and you don't know how to compartmentalize the information you have so that you can take an actual view. You don't know how to put it in the Bunsen burner and break it down chemically so you can understand these things when you hear certain things said to you. Study Bonifer's rings. Bonifer rings, or Bonifer was basically a psychiatrist. I did a paper on him a couple of years ago. And Bonifer espoused this, is that you're mostly influenced, or your behaviors are usually a reflection of those who are closest to you after birth. Once you're birthed and you're brought into this world, the people that have the most influence on you, right, begins to grow. So just like if you took a tree and you cut that tree, you saw that tree down, how they determine the age of a tree is basically how many rings they see once that tree is cut, right? They can count the number of rings, and that'll tell them the age of that particular tree. And that's sort of how Bonifer's rings works, right? So they place an infant child in the middle, and then we look at the rings that circle that child throughout their life, right? And even into adulthood. And you start, the first circle or ring of influence is the mother, right? That's your first circle of influence, is the mother. The second circle of influence is the mother and the father, right? The third ring would be the father, right? And so as it goes out and as you get older, then it's other family members, then that's on one ring, or siblings is on one ring, and then another ring is your grandparents, then on another ring it's your aunts and uncles, then on another ring it's the school teachers, then it's your childhood friends, that's on another ring, and then it's your co-workers, that's on another ring. And so then we start looking at the rings of influences in the individual's lives, and based on their relationship and their experiences within those rings, we can get a good understanding of how that person's life is turned out and how they behave and how they respond to certain things based on their circle of influence. That's where we get that term from Bonifer's theory, that circle of influence. What is your circle of influence? And so we can scientifically, we can observe these things. And so when we look at a child's instance, we can't do it in the womb. It doesn't exist. Right? Because that's simply the seed. Your ring of influence only comes at time of birth. And that's outside things that now affect your behavior. And so you look at an individual and you look at the rings that surrounded them, you look at their circle of influence, you really start to get an understanding of why they act out the way they act out. It might be a ring that was a babysitter. and that influence and something traumatic happened within that ring with that person who's had influence on that child. It could have been an uncle, it could have been an aunt, could have been a sister, it could have been a brother, could have been a stepbrother, a stepdad, a teacher that's introduced trauma into that person's ring of life. In that ring of life, their circle of influence. They've introduced that trauma. And now what happens is that one ring, when it becomes affected now in their lives, all of the other rings that they experience is affected by that one ring of trauma that occurred, maybe at birth, and maybe at 5, or maybe at 10, or maybe at 15, or maybe at 20. And until that trauma is addressed, that cycle, that spiral continues. It continues. How do we know this? Even R.Kelly, no doubt he's a sexual predator. No doubt he's a sexual predator. But we should be asking ourselves, not just is he a sexual predator, but how do we stop that? How do we stop sexual predators from being created in our communities? How do we stop that? Because it's our children, our daughters, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles, our nieces, our nephews, our uncles, our brothers, our cousins that can possibly become victims to sexual predators in our community. We have to stop them from the trauma. We have to protect them from the trauma. We have to be able to recognize when these things are occurring so that we can stop the cycle. But we have those who really want to say, no, R.Kelly was just born that way. No, he wasn't born that way. He wasn't born that way. Someone made that sexual predator, and we need to figure out how we stop people and what can we do to stop creating these sexual predators in our communities, because they tend to act out violently. It's young boys who act out violently against women, usually have some type of trauma or sexual trauma that has occurred. We got to understand, people, that there's always a cause and effect. And what you have is empathetic, or you have people who are no longer sympathetic. You have people who are no longer understanding. You have people who lack nurturing skills. You have people who are selfish and incompassionate simply because of what they see, the effects, and simply because of what they feel or even what they've experienced. But they continue to experience it. Why? Because they still hear it over and over and over again. It didn't just happen to me, but now it's happening to somebody else, and it's happening in the 10s and 20s and thousands. But why? Because we've been told to only look at the effects. We've only been told to look at the Frankenstein. Nobody told us to address the creator. Nobody has told us we need to be addressing the mad scientists. They got you looking in the wrong direction, people. You're looking in the wrong direction. You're only dealing with the effects. You're not dealing with the cause. If you don't listen to anything else I ever say, you have to learn to deal with the cause. Because simply dealing with the effects of a situation is only putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. You can talk all you want to about why black men ain't this and black men don't deserve to live, and black men and a hashtag abort and do this and do that to black men, and this is where they are and they're detrimental to society and you need to move away from them. You need to divest from them. Don't give them your time. They're not worthy of this and not worthy of that. You're only putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, but you're still getting your hands bloody. the amount of blood that you're espousing is still on your feet. It's still on your hands. Because all you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. You're doing nothing to deal with the cause. So your rhetoric and your understanding and your quasi-knowledge is flawed. You're working against yourself. You're perpetuating the issue. Because what happens when you don't address a wound properly? When you don't dress a wound properly? What happens? It becomes infected. It becomes infected. And what happens when a wound becomes infected? The blood becomes infected. And now the person who hasn't, that just not only received the wound that you have to dress is infected, and they're facing imminent death. But now you have to be more careful as the person addressing the gunshot wound, because now the blood is now contaminated and contagious, and now it's infected, and now you think you're doing something by only addressing the effects, but now you're contaminated, thinking that you're addressing the situation, when only you're perpetuating the infection. You're part of the problem when you're not addressing it correctly. You're part of the problem. You're perpetuating the death of not just those who you deem unworthy, but you're perpetuating your own death because you're putting yourself in harm's way now. You're killing yourself, but not addressing the wound properly, by not sanitizing it, simply speaking over it, not clearing away the vitriol, not clearing away the infection and the pus. You're just smearing it around and thinking you're protecting and thinking you're protecting yourselves. You're not doing that. You're not doing that. That's how most plagues and how most diseases have spread throughout this world in time. The Black Plague, smallpox, not understanding how to address the disease. You put your own immunity at risk because you're not addressing the issue correctly. Simply saying hashtag abort. You're perpetuating the death, not of the wounded, but those who care for the wounded. Because some of you are aiding and abetting these infected ones in your sons, in your nephews, your uncles, your brothers, your fathers. You're aiding and abetting it. Oh, we're not talking about hashtagging those that are close to us. No, we're not talking about them. We're not talking about them. No, just those in the future. You're killing yourself because you won't address the cause. All you simply do is look at the effect, and that's the short-sightedness of that argument. That's the failure of that argument. I'm not here to be popular. I'm not here to be unpopular. And I'm not here to make excuses for sexual predators, especially R.Kelly. I'm not making excuses for that. What I'm dealing with is, how do we stop it? How are they created? Because they're not born that way. How do we identify the cause? That's where your argument should be. Let me share something else with you people. Let me share something else.
Years younger, not quite.
Yes.
Tell me about your relationship with your brother growing up. Were you guys close?
I mean, we was like the average kids, you know, growing up. You know, actually, me and Bruce was closer, you know, because by me being a baby, Robert was the baby before me. Yeah, I put it that way. So when I came along, you know, it's just like maybe I shouldn't have came along. You know, so my mom kind of paid a lot of attention to me because I'm the youngest, and I really needed her help and looked for her guidance. So, you know, he's no longer the baby at this point.
So you guys, it doesn't sound like you're particularly close growing up.
Not really. I mean, yeah and no. You know, because a lot of times I used to try to look for his blessing on different things. By me being the youngest, we played basketball, things of that nature, and I used to want to be like Michael Jordan, like they want to be like Michael Jordan. So I wanted to always look for their approval. Bruce gave it to me pretty much, but Robert, it was a challenge. Because like I said, he was the baby before I was born. So.
And then tell me the order of your siblings, oldest to youngest.
My sister Teresa, she's the oldest. Then it's Bruce. Then Robert, then me.
And Bruce is in prison right now?
He's in the county.
He's in county jail.
Yes.
Okay. Why did you decide to participate or be interviewed for Surviving R.Kelly?
Well, it's a lot of different things. I mean, you know, that my family has endured and went through. I love my brother. You know, a lot of people think that I'm trying to just like destroy his character or destroy him. It's not about that. My thing is, if my mom was here, my mom spoke the truth. And she always taught us to speak the truth. And it's like a lot of things that transpired and happened. I feel bad that I hadn't came forth earlier.
Like what things are you referring to?
I mean, just with the allegations with the girls and the different things of that nature. You know, when I was on tour, he used to ask me to go get girls. And I used to tell him, no, that was another reason we fell out. Because what Robert couldn't understand was, how's everybody running around doing everything that he say, but his little brother is being, rebellious toward it.
When you say he used to ask you to get girls, are we talking underage girls?
I mean, to me, they look underage. To me, they look underage. You know, when I looked at them, I seen like my daughter. I'm like, man, she looked young in the face. You know, oh, you hating on me. I'm like, hating on you for what? I mean, I'm not gonna do that. You know, because I don't want nobody doing that to my child. You know, so that's why I pretty much. I gotta put this phone on vibrate, but that's why I pretty much got into it with him a lot, because like I said, you got grown people, adults that's working with him that did everything he said, like the puppet master.
Well, since we already kind of touched on it, there are the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, as you know, or docuseries, brought up a lot of serious allegations about how your brother treats women and also relationships he had with underage girls. Is there truth to those allegations?
I mean, well, you know, he married Aaliyah. I mean, it don't get no truer than that. That these are documents and records that's available for the public. He married her.
Well, we know that happened, but what about, the women that came forth in the documentary and perhaps other women out there who weren't in the documentary, girls who were underage at the time? Do you know firsthand if there was any truth to that?
I mean, I wasn't around to actually see him interact with girls like that as far as on a sexual type of tip. I've seen him, pretty much be interested, like, man, let me get her number, and if I didn't go get it, somebody else went and got the number.
And again, we're talking about girls who appeared to be underage.
Yes.
When was the last time you spoke to your brother?
Why aren't you the landlord? Yes, you. Why aren't you the landlord? Every day.
I believe I spoke to Robert in, I want to say 2000. It might have been 6, whenever the case ended on the child pornography case.
2008.
2008. That's the last time I spoke with him. And when I spoke to him, even though my name was brought up in it, and a lot of people say it wasn't, my face was posted on the news, my name, my character, my liking was brought up in this case, and I was actually watching the news with my children that night. and I seen my face posted on the news. And I'm like, how did that happen? But what happened was, a lot of people don't understand and don't know, I did a lot of doubles for Rob. We don't look that much alike, but you can tell that we're related. And the doubles that I did was you remind me of my G, Your Body's Calling. It was a lot of times that I actually had clothes on that he had on for a particular scene. Robert and his lawyers knew that. So they created reasonable doubt. That's what happened.
So what about what about, you've told me some personal stories, I won't talk about with whom, but what about, people you know of going to the police? Why haven't they gone? Let me start with this. Why haven't they gone to the police? We talked about one particular young girl who's now a woman who says she was in your family, who says she was abused by R.Kelly. Why haven't they come forward, do you think?
Because people are afraid. It's basically, this is how I see it, and this is why my family is divided the way that it is. You have the people over here on this side is speaking the truth, and they're not with that. They don't condone it. Then you got people on this side feel like, well, if I ever say anything bad about Robert, he might not never give me anything. He might not never look. He might cut me off, and that's what they be afraid of.
Do you think your brother treats or has treated underage girls inappropriately, sexually speaking? And if so, why? Does he have issues?
I mean, yes, he do have an issue. Anytime an adult, look at minors or women that's underage, that's anybody. This is not just for Robert. This is any pedophile, any person that has that type of characteristics where they can look at a girl and say, hey, you can tell a baby in the face. And what I mean by a baby, you can tell 15, 16, even though some of these girls do be having, they might be, thick, or as they call it, or they might have weight on them, but their face don't lie. You can look in their face and tell that they don't look of age.
But is he a pedophile?
I mean, I can't honestly say that for sure. I just know that he has a problem with control. And if anybody out there love him, they should want to see him get help. It's not just about jail time. It's about facing the issues and the different things that he is alleged of doing. I mean, they have to come to a head at some point.
You brought up, is there a reason, do you think, that might have led to this behavior? I think you talked about being molested, correct?
Yes.
That's very painful.
Listen up, people.
Did that happen to your brother too?
Yes, I believe it did. I really believe it did, because the same person that molested me used to make it feel like I did something wrong, so I can't go outside. My mom's going to work, my stepdad going to work, so I mean, this is the only adult figure or teenager that's overseeing us. So I had to actually do everything that they said, and it's been several times that I knew that I can go outside, and Robert had to stay in the house. And when he stayed in the house, I could just imagine what happened to him, because I know what happened to me.
Let me end that right here, family. Let me end that right here. Now, the interviewer asks R.Kelly at the end of this segment, what do you believe led to R.Kelly's sexual predatory behavior? Because no one's dismissing it. Should definitely have been prosecuted for it. But what led to it? And he clearly goes into their sexual abuse and molestation as children. And how do we know these are still children? Because they still have to ask permission. Can they go outside? They're being cared for by a teenager. This is what he says. The older person that's watching them is supposed to be responsible for them is in their teens. So we know these are young children. These are two young Black boys who are experiencing sexual abuse at the hands of an older person in their household. This is what I mean about dealing with the causes versus the effects. We get overly emotional, and as well we should, about the predatory actions of men and women against people who are underage and even people who are of age, rapists, serial rapists. But we only have the mental capacity to strictly just deal with the effects, the acted out behavior. We need to go after the cause. We need to go after the cause. And this is what I mean. Instead of trying to address a specific issue, we still want to look the other way. We only want to deal with the effects. When you ask, why is this happening? You're dealing with the cause. Instead of saying, this is happening, now what do I do? Or because this is happening, now I'm going to react. When your reaction should be with, what is the cause? That's the difference between someone who's an activist or someone that's a revolutionary. They don't deal with the effects of why something's happening. They understand that we have to be active and revolutionize the thinking or the origin or the cause of a behavior. Whether it's racism, white supremacy, where it's sexual abuse, you have to deal with the cause of it. That's a universal law, people. Science has put it in these terms. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. Y'all seen the little thing, it often sits on people's desks, and it has the 5 or 6 little metal balls that are hanging from the string, and then you take one ball and you let it swing and it hits the other ball, and then you see the effects of how that one action ends up right on the other end. That energy, right? That energy that's been created. Now it has an effect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations down the line. But most of us are only dealing with what we see is occurring down the line. No one wants to talk about the person that actually caused this action or reaction to occur. And it's prevalent in our communities on how Black people deal with situations and how we deal with unfavorable issues. And this is the thing that we're talking about. And so how you deal with cause, right? How you deal with causation is first you have to first observe it. And you observe it through what we know is reactionary things, right? So in order to understand causation, you first must do that, understand it. You must study it. You must see the things that are put in place and the things that are around it that creates these environments. You have to observe the actions. And that's all we do is just observe the actions. But we have to trace those actions back. to the cause. It's a universal law. And so again, even in regards to R. Kelly, his actions are abominable. He needed to be stopped. He needed to be stopped. And if that takes prison and jail time, then so be it. He needed to be stopped. But what about the other R. Kellys or sexual predators out there who were first victims of sexual abuse? And that sexual abuse has gone undressed and now they become predators. What about those that are still out there? Both men and women in our communities. They're still out there. And we can't simply just wait around for the effects. We have to look for it. We have to put things in place that protect our children, our young boys, our young girls. We have to put things in place, but we first have to recognize that they are not born that way, that they're made. That they're made. Let me look into one more thing. Let me show you something else, right? Is that it? I want y'all to understand something. Let's see how we see and don't see. And this is fair use. Freedom of Information Act. I'm going to be sharing this information for teaching and training purposes and for discussion and furtherance dealing with the issue of sexual abuse in the Black community. We're not receiving any donations or any funds. But let's look at something, people.
Service office. 20, you stay with Nadine.
Yes, my dear.
What you looking at out there? What you looking at? That's it. Give me some sugar. Now get on downstairs. What did I say? Get on downstairs. In that basement and drop them. Hurry up. I'm putting them on. Come on. I said, come on. Pull them down. You heard me, pull them down. Pull them right over my feet. Get over your clothes. Close, you don't have to be afraid. Now touch me. Now you want to. Yeah, that's it. Kiss me. Come on, kiss me. Baby, give me some sugar. Oh, I'm gonna tell you.
doing, man? You all right?
So for those of you who are not familiar with the scene that I just showed, that's from the film Antoine Fisher. With starring Derek Luke and Denzel Washington. And for those of you who didn't know, it's based on a true story. There is a real Antoine Fisher. Who was under the care of a caregiver. And as we've seen depicted here in this scene, left in another care of another teenager or young woman. And then the physical and the mental and the sexual abuse that occurred to him, as we see he's depicted here, about 8 or 9 years old, maybe 9 years old. If you watch the movie Antoine Fisher, he's a young man who's troubled. He's entering the military. He fights at the drop of a hat. You rub him the wrong way. You brush by him. You step on his shoe. You bump him. You get to the seat that he wanted to get to. And you just happen to sit there and you just sitting down. He's angry. He's the one that's always in the bar fighting. Fighting at the drop of a hat. Just angry. Every issue, every resolution, everything in him that deals with conflict resolution, he deals with it with anger and violence. And so then he's told, we're going to dismiss you from the military if you don't seek some help. Again, going back, Black men, we need mental health. We need mental health treatment. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you need. Don't be afraid of it. So Antoine Fisher has to go. Derek Luke is playing the character. Antoine Fisher is a real person. He has to go see Denzel Washington, who's the military psychologist, to explain and get to the bottom of why he has these anger issues. And we see this troubled young man that not only it's affecting his military career and the things that he wants to do in life, but there's also a young Black girl who he's involved in the movie, and their relationship is strained. She likes him. He knows it. He likes her. But just being in a situation with being intimate with a young woman in a way that he respects and values her, he struggles with that. Why? Why? Because of the scene we just watched, because of the abuse that he endured, the sexual abuse that he endured as a young Black child that no one ever addressed, that he held in his whole entire life. No way, no avenue, not ever being taught how to express that hurt and that pain. And so it always came out in physical violence towards those who were close to him, towards those who he didn't even know. His first reaction was to be violent. Why? That's the effect, but why? And it's not until in the film that he's talking to a professional, Denzel Washington, that he understands now that the trauma that he went through as a young boy has affected him his whole entire life. It's hindered him in his relationship with a beautiful young Black sister, that now he's verbally abusive towards her. And now that he can't deal with people surrounding him, even his own family, he has issues with abandonment issues, even with his own mother. Why you don't want me? Why did you leave me in this situation? Do you know what I went through? That's a story that happened with Antoine Fisher that's more common than what we know as even observed among our Black men and Black boys in our communities today. As I started earlier, I can find so much information on these type of situations that involve our young sisters and how they're traumatized, sexually abused at young ages, and we must support them and protect them. But as I began to research what about young Black blood, is the information is almost non-existent. That's an issue. That's an issue. That's an issue. So while we're looking at the cause of why these young Black men in our communities are so rageful, why? Not simply saying this is the only thing that affects them, but it's there. And people find it easier to look the other way. Why? Because it's harder. It takes more pouring into dealing with the cause of a situation than dealing with the effects of it. And that's all we address. So you're only identified by your behavior. Let me get this in here. You're only identified by your behavior. You're only identified by the acting out. And that's what's being prosecuted. R.Kelly is being prosecuted, and rightfully so, for the acts that he perpetrated. Right? The effects of what his brother testified, what his brother's been espousing, saying, listen, we were abused. We were abused at young ages. And no one, he's been espousing that for years. He's been espousing that for years. But because we have this aversion, we have this stereotype of how sexuality and over-sexuality of Black boys are dismissed or sometimes looked at as badges of honor, versus then how we look at those things when it comes to our Black sisters and little Black girls and little brown girls, that those things are not taken to a degree where we see the cause and the effect of what's going on with this abuse that's running rapid in the Black community among our Black boys. And when Black men talk about trauma, they're looked at as weak. They're looked at as weak. Right? So I want to share something else. You're going to share something else. Let's talk about it. This is from Ebony. Still an African-American controlled news media. And this is from January 9, 2019. It says, R. Kelly's brother says he and singer were molested by older sister. Carrie Kelly, R. Kelly, and I were molested by our older sister, Teresa. Carrie Kelly, who was featured in recent Lifetime docuseries Survivor, R. Kelly is the younger brother of the R&B singer. During the series, it was revealed that both Carrie and the My Body's Calling crooner were molested as children, though they didn't reveal their abuser. But during an interview with Tasha K, y'all know who she is, Tasha K of Unwind with Tasha, Carrie opened up about their molestation, saying their older sister, Teresa Kelly, sexually abused Carrie and Robert when she was 16. And they were 6, and R. Kelly was 10 years old. Can we for a moment, can we for a brief moment understand what happens to a 10-year-old boy when he's sexually molested and raped by someone who's supposed to be protecting of him, by someone who this should have never occurred with, someone whose care he was left in to protect him betrayed the innocence of a 10-year-old boy. I'm not giving excuses for what R.Kelly has done. I'm telling you, we have to deal with the causes so that we don't have more R.Kellys in our community. Because if someone would have addressed this situation when R.Kelly was going through this at 10 years old, the young women that became his victims, the victim creating victims, that the girls that became his victims, we could have saved them from that trauma. Some that will never recover from it. We could have done something. Something could have been done to save those girls who are now young women today and still are exhibiting the effects of the victimization that they received through R.Kelly, by R.Kelly. But if someone would have opened their eyes, if someone would have been able to see what this young boy at 10 years of age was going through, the deadening, the destruction of the innocence of a 10-year-old boy, creating this callousness towards young women, creating this cold heart towards young women, this monster, this Frankenstein that's being created right in our communities. Right in our communities. How many 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds, young black boys and young brown boys are in our communities today that are experiencing these same things, suffering in silence? These monsters that are being formulated in our communities. They walk to school every day with your daughters and your sons and your nieces and your nephews. They sit next to them every day in the classroom, suffering in silence, transforming them from innocent children to predators, sexual predators, deviant. And the only thing that we can say, well, they're grown now. To hell with them. We have to stop it, family. It's childish and immature to not look at the cause of these things in our communities. It's evil to not do it. Teresa Kelly sexually abused Carrie and Robert when she was 16 and they were 6 and 10. Respectfully, Carrie said his sister grabbed his head as a child and forced him to perform sexual favors. A 6-year-old. A 6-year-old. A 6-year-old. What does that do to a 6-year-old boy being forced to perform oral sex? On someone who's been left, they've been left in their care. Carrie also said Teresa allowed eldest brother Bruce to play outside when he wanted. Carrie and Robert, however, were forced to stay inside. So in other words, this was predatory. This was a scheme. They were forced to stay inside with her one at a time strategically, as we saw him say with his own words in the interview that I showed, so that she could sexually abuse them. While Carrie wasn't present when Robert was abused, he believes Robert experienced the same molestation. The difference, however, is that he believes the future R&B star enjoyed it, and that's usually what happens. We heard the same thing from Lil Wayne when he says, Birdman forced me at 11 years old to have a sexual encounter with a young lady. I was a virgin at 11 years old. And then Lil Wayne says, I enjoyed that shit. I enjoyed it. You're 11. You're 10. How do you know what the true enjoyment of sex is? At that age, sex now has been perverted. That's a trauma. That in all of this, no one wants to address, bring to the forefront and spotlight it. And the reason why it's important, because these monsters, these sexual predators, these abusers, and this is what they become when they're abused at these ages and these things aren't addressed. They become predators and abusers and little monsters in the community. They become rapers and murderers and thieves. They act out in ways that we don't understand. And we simply say it has to just be that the seed of the black man is evil. That what's in you, black man, whatever comes out of you is evil. No, that's a coward's understanding. That's a novice understanding. That's an ignorant approach to a real life trauma, to a real crime that's being perpetrated against young black boys and young black girls. But we're talking about our young black boys. It's the coward that says, let's just deal with the effect and dismiss it. This is how we deal with the effect. Abort it. But you cowards, you run because you won't deal with the cause. Listen to what he says. He says, Robert, I believe, mentioned it to Bruce, our older brother, and I overheard it. He was bragging about, I'm not a virgin no more. For him, it was like a rush. I think he enjoyed it. And I think that's another reason they got along after the fact. So now you see a 16-year-old is grooming a 10-year-old to enjoy having sex with her. That's a crime, people. That's a travesty. And we're talking about R.Kelly. But look. Let's hear it again.
Been going on between Wayne and Birdman. They've famously been seen kissing in public.
Let's hear it again.
In fact, Carter 3 has always been my favorite CD, but unfortunately, recently I did lose it after leaving it at the bathroom at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Wheezy has had a long and fruitful career, dropping 12 albums, winning 5 Grammys, and sleeping with so many women, I can only assume he's caught as many STDs as Ash Ketchum has caught Pokemon. Legend has it, Wayne has slept with thousands of women, which is understandable considering the fact that he calls himself the Pussy Monster and released a song saying he wanted to bang every girl in the world. Those lyrics probably should have come with a disclaimer saying every girl in the world over 18.
How old are you, baby? Oh no, put her back. Put her back.
So it's safe to assume that Lil Wayne has one of the highest libidos in hip-hop, despite what his lackluster threesome sex tape video have you believe. But the glamour of Lil Wayne's love life was punctured in 2009 when a clip from his unauthorized Carter documentary released, showing him telling a story recounting his first time having sex at age 11.
I was fucking at 11.
But what's interesting about this clip is the role that Birdman seems to play in instigating a seemingly illegal and abusive sexual encounter for the preteen Wayne.
I'm gonna do you like Baby them did me. Yeah.
Y'all hear that? At 11. And he's saying it as if he knew he should be enjoying it at 11. This is what R. Kelly's brother is saying. These are the same things that occurred. And so then when we hear Wayne saying he slept with thousands upon thousands of women, do y'all understand the psychosis that goes into that? Can't possibly value women if he only sees them as objects of sexual pleasure. But this is formulated, this is created in him at 11 by an adult that should have been caring, should have been protecting him. Same thing we read about R. Kelly and his sister. She should have been protecting him at 10 years of age. But both of them are taking advantage. And look, they're both were similar in ages that these things occurred. Little Wayne said I was 11. Carrie Kelly said Robert Kelly was abused at the age of 10 by his older sister. And as we go through these stories, we start to see these patterns, people. We looked at the clip of Antoine Fisher. He gives his own depiction of the story in his recount. He's about the same age. 9, 10 years old, maybe 11, when he's experienced sexual abuse by the hand of a female caregiver. This is what I'm talking about, people. It's destructive to only look at the effects of something and not the cause of it. I got something else I want to share with you guys. Let me show you this. Share my screen again. Let me put this on presentation mode, not slideshow. Oh, yeah. Let's deal with some of these. Let's deal with this. Sexual predators are made, they're not born. And we have to address this properly. Sexual predators in the shadows. This is an article, a newspaper clip, actually a newspaper, I'm sorry, a news report about India Kirksey, an African-American woman who's accused of raping a 4-year-old and then presenting it on the internet, right? Let's listen to the story a little bit.
Price Hill woman is arrested and accused of raping a 4-year-old at her West Price Hill home. Now the family of 20-year-old India Kirksey is coming to her defense. 9 on Your Side reporter TJ Parker spoke with them today and has their story.
Now wait. She's accused of raping a 4-year-old child, but now her family is coming to her defense. Why is that, people? Why is that? Let's continue.
From West Price Hill.
It's just not of her character. There's not nothing that she would do.
This family member who didn't want to be identified on camera tells 9 on Your Side this woman, India Kirksey, has special needs. Despite that, though, she agrees what Kirksey is accused of doing was wrong.
I know she's being portrayed as a monster. Anytime there's someone saying that someone is being some type of sexual attack on anyone, I automatically would think someone is a monster too, but literally anyone around you would know this is really not her.
So here you have a family member who chooses to not be identified for more reasons than I can only imagine. But she says something really intriguing here. That although she's guilty of this, and people who do this should be looked at as monsters and predators, but this is not her character. This is not in her character to do this. She has special needs. If you go into the R.Kelly story, he was also diagnosed as a special needs. He had a learning disability. And still to this day. So here we have people who are clearly predators, especially this young woman here who's accused of raping a 4-year-old, right? Is this a greater monster than R.Kelly? See, that's the childish comparisons that oftentimes we hear when we start to say sexual abuse in our community is happening. People start comparing. Well, what about this? Well, what about the people that abuse and haven't gone through this? You don't know what people have gone through. No one wakes up and flips on a switch and become a predator, a sexual predator. There's something that's within them that caused that seed to grow. And what you're seeing is the outward acts, is the outward manifestation of that seed that was planted in them. Here you have the family member saying this woman who raped this 4-year-old, this African-American woman, India Kirksey, who raped this 4-year-old child, that it's not in her character. It's not in her character. I'm saying let's have the honest conversation, people. Are there simply predators out here? Black men and black women. This woman rapes a 4-year-old, not a 14-year-old, not that that's even better, but a 4-year-old. If you can ask yourself what would go through the mind of R.Kelly to rape or a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old to victimize people of that age, what would be going through his mind? If you can ask yourself that question, ask yourself the question, what would be going through the mind of a young woman who rapes a 4-year-old? It's a mental health issue, people. We're demonizing people over mental health issues and trauma that they've experienced in their lives. Let's continue.
Family Services tell us they were tipped off by someone in Texas who saw a video of Kirksey performing a sex act on a 4-year-old. Police arrested her yesterday. They say Kirksey admitted to them she did this.
We, as family, try the best we can to therapy and talk to her about stuff and her safety. And sometimes you can only do so much.
Now, Kirksey is ordered not to have any contact with that child. Her bond is set at $350,000. Reporting downtown, I'm TJ Parker, 9 on Your Side.
I say a woman is arrested.
And listen, now she's told she can't have any contact with this child. So this tells me that this is a child that's living in her home, or that she has access to and has had access to possibly. And what she does is, and you have to address the mental health issue that's involved here, because she not only performs a sex act on a 4-year-old, she puts it on social media. She records it on social media. There's a mental health issue here we have to address. This is what I mean about dealing with the causes. The mental health issue that's rampant and not looked at in the Black community on both men and inside of men, both men and women, is out of control. And when mental health issues go unchecked, the effects of it are disastrous. The effects of it are deadly. But we have to address the mental health in our communities. We have to do that, people. Let's go a little bit further. Sexual predators in the shadows. Here's another example of a woman accused of raping 2 boys. Watch this. Listen to this, family. This is what I mean. I'm talking about protecting our children and not creating more sexual predators.
A Coleraine Township woman is in jail tonight, accused of raping 2 young boys who she babysat over a decade ago. 9 News reporter Tom McKee is live with how this case came to light. Tom?
Well, Caroline told a relative of these 2 men who are now 18 and 23 came to police to say that Barbara Brooks had sexually assaulted them between 2000 and 2003.
Now listen, this case only comes to light because these 2 young boys, and they're no longer young boys, they're men now. The oldest is 23. These are young men now who are in our communities, who've been walking around for over a decade, almost, dealing with this, carrying around this secret of sexual trauma, rape, and abuse from the hands of a trusted caregiver. They've been walking around in this community, dealing with your daughters, dealing with your aunts, dealing with your nieces, and sometimes they're dealing with your nephews, they're dealing with your uncles, they're dealing with your brothers, because now they've developed a complete aversion to dealing with women because of the sexual trauma that they receive from women. Then now they prefer men. They go into a lifestyle of homosexuality because they're dealing with these traumas that they've received from women in the community. But now this only comes to light because these men are now of age and they're tired. They can no longer bottle up this pressure and this frustration and this pain of dealing with the sexual trauma that has befallen them, no fault to their own. Imagine the possible relationships that they've been in, that they've affected someone adversely because they've had to deal with this.
It allegedly occurred as she babysat them at an apartment in Mount Healthy. Now, Brooks herself is in the Hamilton County Justice Center tonight as authorities try to sort out exactly what happened. Now, it was 2 counts of rape that are the charges that brought the 62-year-old Brooks to Hamilton County Municipal Court Friday morning. She lives on Niagara Drive in Coleraine Township and was arrested yesterday by the Cincinnati Police Fugitive Squad. The victims in question are listed in court documents by their initials as SSR, and the other is called DS. Brooks' attorney said her client suffers from
Now listen, one young man was born in 1988. Another young man was born in 1993. These are young people. Young people. Young people. That are carrying around this weight, this trauma of sexual abuse, this shame.
plasma and asked for an OR bond, but prosecutors disagreed.
One child was 12 to 15 during that period, and the other was 7 to 9. I don't see that extra fidelity here, the fact that she's a female.
She denies obviously these allegations, and we would ask her to consider setting OR a bond or the alternative an EMD so she can continue her treatments at home.
And listen, she's a babysitter in the community. She has been for years. Do we even know? And I'm trying to get further in the story a little bit, but do we even know how many young men that actually have come through her care and at what ages they've actually come through her care? Are we safe to assume that they weren't victimized by her sexual advances, that they weren't preyed on as well sexually, that they weren't raped and molested as well, as these two men had the courage enough to come forward? How many hundreds, tens or hundreds of children have passed through her hands and her care in decades? Here, she's in her 60s. The alleged abuse of these two boys occurred maybe a 10-year, a decade prior to that. So she was in her 50s, maybe late 40s. We don't know how many young men or even young girls that she's probably abused. These are just the two that came forward. But these are men that are out in the society carrying this trauma that no one wants to deal with. And I see you. I see you. A Columbus woman accused of raping 3 boys under the age of 12. Amarita Griffey. Let's talk about it.
At 6, a Columbus woman is facing charges tonight after reportedly confessing to performing a sex act on 3 young boys. Amarita Griffey was arraigned in court today on 3 counts of rape involving a child under the age of 13. NBC4's Ted Hart is live tonight at Columbus Police Headquarters with a closer look at this disturbing case. Ted?
Colleen, neighbors say that Rita Griffey has always kind of gravitated toward the children in their Southwest Columbus neighborhood. A bit odd, they thought, but not a problem. Never a problem, really. Now, though, things have changed.
I want to ask this. If she was a man and the community knew that they were always gravitating towards children and it seemed a bit odd to them, would not this man probably have been referred to as a possible pedophile already, or referred to as a possible person who's a possible child molester? Had this been a man in the community that everybody saw that always was hanging around children more than adults, like they observed this young woman doing? This is what I mean about the stereotypes and the stigma when it comes to child sexual abuse and the predators. I showed this even earlier when I showed the white women sexual predators who were mostly school teachers involved in underage sex and molestation of children in the schools. The initial response that I received in the chat was, hey, look, see, yeah, that's what white women do. They do it more than black women. The issue is not whether or not they do it more than black women. The issue, the proper thing would be is that it occurs, that it happens to children. But immediately it goes to, you see, white folks, white women do it more than black folks. Well, you're not really engaged in the white community like that, are you? We're talking about what's going on in your community. Where is the responsiveness and the outrage of that? It's silent in the chat. It's silent in the chat.
Police say Amarita Griffey has admitted that she engaged in sexual activity with 3 young boys.
Range from the age of 10 to 11.
She's facing 3 counts.
There that age is again, 10 to 11. We saw it with Lil Wayne. We saw it with R.Kelly. We saw it with the previous young lady, lady we just showed. That same age group. Here it is, 10 to 11 again.
Of rape of a child under the age of 13. Neighbors say Griffey lives with her brother and grandmother. Neighbors say Griffey has always seemed a bit childlike.
Just wanting to be around kids and be social. I mean, she's very sociable, very, very caring person. She'd always come over and hang out with the kids and my neighbor.
Coons says she never felt as though the children were at risk around Griffey, but that Griffey had changed recently.
When those other kids started coming around, it was like she was a totally different person.
Jessica Coons says it was May 21st when Amarita Griffey was spotted in the backyard of her home with the 3 neighborhood boys, 1 10 and 2 11-year-olds. Coons believes Griffey saw the boys as her peers and felt pressure to do what they asked.
I feel like they really influenced Rita to do something that she didn't want to do.
Now here, this is the part I wanted to get to. You see how now you have another adult blaming the 10 and 11-year-old children for the acts of the adult. This is insane, people. This is what I mean about how we look at female predators, sexual predators in this country and in this community. As somehow, because these are boys, and this is the same thing that we hear with this whole retarded hashtag abort crowd that says, blame it on the children, blame it on the male seed. They're the problem. That's the issue. Here, she just literally blamed 3 10 and 11-year-old boys for their victimization, for their rape and molestation by an adult. She believes that the 10 and 11-year-old pressured the adult to do something that was so horrific that she would have sex with these underage children. She blamed the children. The effects, people. Dealing simply with the effects and not the causes. There's a sickness among you people. There's a sickness among you people. Here we are again. Let's see. Let's see if I can get that one. Let's see here. Let me go back. And let's look at this one. Let's look at this one. It's a sickness here, people.
And a jury is now deciding the fate of a woman accused of sexually abusing 2 children. But after 5 days of graphic, emotional, and conflicting testimony and more than a dozen witnesses, the trial of Juanita Fisher is now in the hands of a jury.
It comes to a close without Fisher taking the stand. Ann Bowden has been covering the story from its beginning. She joins us now with what happened today. Ann?
Well, Rick and Vicky, the defense decided not to put Juanita Fisher on the stand at the last minute, but they said they made that decision because they already had a taped, emotional, tearful interview from Juanita Fisher that they showed the jury when she was interviewed by a police detective here in Clark County. When they presented that to the jury, they believed that they had showed their evidence concerning Juanita Fisher. Now, the prosecution believes they have presented a solid case, but the defense says their case is solid because they presented reasonable doubt.
I do feel like we have gotten our evidence out and look forward to the jury receiving it.
34-year-old Juanita Fisher is accused of sexually abusing a 10-year-old male relative 7 years ago.
There we go again. There's that age. There's that age. Even though we should look at all of our young boys and young men to protect them at all ages, start paying attention to your sons around that age, your nieces, your nephews. Start your grandchildren. Start paying attention to around little boys that are around that age, between 9, 10, and 11 years old, because we're clearly starting to see that this is where this sexual abuse usually occurs. Just by observing the information we've talked about today, this is where this sexual abuse usually occurs among young men at around this age, around 9, 10, and 11 years old. This is usually their first encounters from the information that we've been gleaning today. That same age, we have to start dealing with the causes and not just the effects.
And then forcing him to have sex with a female relative of the same age while she watched. Tuesday, the defense began with its star witness to try and prove it's all a lie. Defense testimony began with the boy's ex-girlfriend.
We think that is pretty powerful. And
On Friday, the defense showed the jury Facebook postings between the alleged female juvenile victim in the case and the girlfriend. The Facebook postings occurred after the alleged molestation, and they plainly state both knew the boy had made up the entire story to get back at Fisher for forbidding him to see the girlfriend. Post by post, the girlfriend read the exchange on the stand. What he said ain't true. You know why he did it, right? He wasn't allowed to see me because of her. I don't know why he would do that over a girl, but he did. Now, early on, the prosecution asked the judge to throw out the postings, but the judge denied it.
First of all, she did not know whether or not those were complete Facebook listings.
this is a young lady who has no reason today to lie about that. In fact, you would think at most she might be angry at the former boyfriend or something.
And so now we hear in the story now that now the alleged victims now their whole story has to be taken and looked at it as if it may have never happened or if they made the whole thing up. And we often hear this when it comes to victims of a young age in sexual abuse cases, where there's always this question of whether or not they made it up, or whether or not these 10-year-olds created these elaborate stories of sexual abuse simply because they wanted to victimize someone else. Again, 10 years old dealing with 34-year-old. So even in the sense of the predators and how we see these things play out, how predators, female predators are viewed, even in this country, female sexual predators are even viewed in this country and in our communities. You clearly see something completely different, especially when it comes to the male sexual predators. We have to look at both sides of this, because it's usually the male sexual predators that's preying on or engaging the females, but it's the female sexual predators that's usually engaging the males, the little black and brown boys. And it's their behavior of the little black and brown boys that everyone wants to highlight as if they're just these monsters. But because the Frankensteins, the Dr. Frankensteins of these black male monsters are female, then there's a degree of questionability of whether or not it should even be taken seriously, because these are simply boys dealing with sex at a young age. Where oftentimes it's worn as a badge of honor instead of realizing and understanding what it is, and as sexual victimization and over-sexualization of boys. This is exactly the things that we have to address. Is nothing is all the call. What we see with our black man today is not just one cause. You just can't say, yeah, it's just them. There's a part that's being played. There's a part that's being played. And all of it must be considered. But we have this fracturing in our community that pits one group against another group, and no one's being healed from it. No one's being healed from it. So I'm going to play something. And again, I'm going to be invoking the Freedom of Information Act. We're going to be sharing some audio. I'm going to be sharing some audio. Because I just recently heard some very disturbing exchanges that goes into the very thing that we're talking about, on how we look at victimization of our young black boys. And when we talk about trauma, how people in the black community are so easily dismissive of it. They're so easily dismissive of it. I'm going to share this audio. Going to share this audio. And so let me tell you what we get ready to hear. I'm about to play a recording, an audio recording from the Taz. And I will say,
Is responsible for the whole community's fuck up. It's like
more blame, more blame.
okay to be a little bit selfish. And so, wait. The major problem is right
In this community, and it's stagnated. Black men, or that you think a hands-off approach with black men is going to solve, or black boys is going to solve your issues. Shalom, family. We want to end it right there. I would choose not to play that recording from here. But again, if you know anyone or suspect anyone that's dealing with child sexual abuse or child sexual trauma, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the cyber tip line is at the bottom of the screen. I appreciate those who stayed with us this long. Professor Lovelady, I appreciate you for being with us. Shout out to Simeon, the atheist killer, being in the building. Authentically Erica, thank you for being in the building as well. Brother Miriam Yahoo, appreciate you for being in the building as well. And also Brother KOT in the building with you as well. I just wanted to play this, something that I prepared and did it a while ago. So I just wanted to play this. It was appropriate. I felt to go back in to this breakdown and just bring this information to light once again. And hopefully someone was enlightened and take a deeper look, have a clear view of the evils that are still lurking in our communities, how to identify these things, not to look at it through the lenses of male or female, but the fact that anyone from any background can engage in these types of practices that harm children. And we should not just be focusing on males or people of color, but we should be looking at and focusing on the safety of children as a whole. And when things don't seem to be right, sometimes usually they're just not right. And so again, I appreciate you guys for being with us. It's late in the evening. Again, I want to say thank you as well. Going to be doing some rebranding to the channel, as I spoke about a few days ago. I appreciate you, Sister Lovely. Appreciate you as well. Shout out to you as well, KLT. We're going to be doing some rebranding. We're going to be talking about more things dealing with mental health, strengthening the mind. And that's what this channel has really been doing. We've been trying to really do with this channel right now is strengthen the minds, the bodies, and the spirits of our people as we go forward in this day and time. It is a much needed thing. Building up the mind and strengthening the mind. Things that are going on in the world today. This is what we're going to be needing. Your spiritual health, your mental health, your physical health is going to be important. And so we're going to be getting into some of those things even more in depth. And again, the hour's late. We've already spent a few hours on, but I just wanted to go ahead and talk about the few things you see, just a little basic change. And the logo, we're still new Torah movement. But we're going to be talking about ascending consciousness. We're going to be instilled based on the foundation of the scriptures, but how we protect and guard our hearts and our minds, which the scripture teaches us to do. Guard our hearts and our minds. And so, again, we're going to be doing a little bit of rebranding to the channel. We're going to be taking the discussions and the topics to a higher level dimension of discussion and understanding. And I appreciate you guys. Shabbat Shalom. Peace and blessings to you, fam. May the Most High put his arms of protection around you and guide your hearts and your mind. May he protect you and keep your family safe. And with that, family, peace, blessings, and keep ascending.